I'm Sally Ede-Golightly. I'm a figurative artist and I have been painting people and figures, portraits for about the last 10 years. I had an exhibition on at the Gatehouse Gallery in December. At that exhibition I had a painting of a self-portrait with a cat, which was a kind of a slightly unusual painting for my own body of work. And David approached me after that exhibition and suggested that I might be interested in painting an RAF pilot who was from the Czech Republic who came down off Guernsey during World War II. But he specifically kind of pointed to that painting of the self-portrait with the cat. So I always had that in mind, that he wanted something not necessarily a kind of very formal war portrait that you might see kind of typical of, like, for example, Sargent or in the Imperial War Museum, but something a little bit more, just a little bit different. It wouldn't just be a portrait of the pilot, but there would be more of a personal element to it. I spent quite a lot of time researching, and the pilot's called Jaroslav Novak, and I was lucky enough to come across quite a lot of information through the Roll of Honour, which is a list of pilots who came down in the seas around Guernsey during World War II, but also through sites which were from the Czech Republic, because it turned out that, you know, he had quite a career behind him. And the more I dug, the more I realised that there was quite an interesting story, not only his life, but also the last hours of his life. I work in oil on linen as often as I can, because it is a medium which I think is just so versatile. I love the way that I can layer it and create texture, and the kind of the subtlety in the colours. For me, it's just, you know, this is the palette that I always use. I always use the same 5 colours in all my paintings. So this is my palette and it's just automatic. I'm on autopilot when I'm mixing colours. I don't really have to think about it because I know the palette so well. I wanted quite a large canvas. I also chose quite a rough weave linen. For some reason I just felt like that was quite kind of reminiscent of the war. So it's very coarse, it's the coarsest linen I could buy. And I started with the pilot. The most important thing for me was that I got him in and down, and that he was kind of front and centre. I really enjoyed this imagery of a pilot in a pilot's outfit. I was really drawn to that when I was looking through images and doing my research. And I only had a kind of passport photo headshot to work from, but I really wanted to give him a body because there's something quite iconic or memorable about that image. I've also used aluminium metal leaf for the Spitfires. I really felt it served its purpose because the aluminium really represents the kind of the fragility of these planes, and I just didn't really feel that I could portray that in the same way through the medium of paint. I feel this work encompasses quite a few different artistic references. First of all was Emil Filler, and Emil Filler was an incredible artist who unfortunately spent the war in concentration camp and really saw the kind of the horrors of war, and he created a series of drawings after and during those war years and post-war years, depicting the war through the means of Greek stories, through the Greek gods, but also through kind of monsters, and really getting into the kind of the psychology and the torment that he suffered. I have the 2 kind of serpent monsters on the horizon representing that dark side of war, the part which is just too horrible to kind of think about. And then I also have always had an obsession with a Czech artist called Frank Kapka, who is a brilliant colourist and portrait painter. His self-portrait, which is a study in yellow, is one of my favourite pieces of work, and I often refer to it. And as this was a piece which is very much themed by the pilot's background, I thought, well, maybe I can look into Kapka, and I found one of his paintings called The Family, or Family Portrait, from 1910, beautiful painting of what you can interpret it as you like, but you know, a mother and a daughter, or two sisters and a dog. And I just thought, you know, I'll never really know the story of this pilot, but a common theme for a lot of people during the war is that, you know, they lost family, or family, you know, lost their sons. I wanted there to be a lot of information in the painting for it to really represent the kind of the chaotic nature of life in general, but for him to be standing as though he is above all of that now, and for him to just seem incredibly calm and serene, and to compositionally stand through, so that although there's a lot going on in the painting, the first thing you notice really is him and his presence. And this kind of play between calm and chaos is just one that I'm very much interested in general, but it's, you know, it really does reflect the kind of the chaos of war, but also the chaos of family, leaving, you know, the thoughts of leaving family behind, or potentially, you know, he's above all of that now. His head is with his family, as in these last moments, and he's left behind him at his feet, looking down kind of the plains, which he stands above. The bottom half of the painting took a little bit longer to develop. I needed it to have a lot of weight compositionally, so to balance the top, but I also wanted it to be, you know, representing the darker side. And in a way, you know, it's much easier to paint a happy family than the dark, horrible, you know, than you're really facing it yourself. So that was more difficult, and I sat on it for quite a long time, just compositionally thinking about different options and how to make it work. The sea was very prominent in the descriptions that I read. That imagery, when I was reading this story, was just so strong. I really felt like it was important to have that depicted in the painting. But there were problems with regards to how to balance that with the more colourful top side of the painting. And I also wanted to have the planes flying away from Guernsey. If the plane's flying away from Guernsey, then and it's evening, then I know in the summer that the sunset would be behind Guernsey. But also there was so much firing and gun shooting from the island, from Castle Cornet, from, you know, Cherbourg, all these points, that the island would just be alight. So I had this vision of kind of quite bright, strong, colourful sea where all of this light was reflected. But then I just realised that actually it needed to be just dark and quiet and almost black, and quite sinister in a way, because it's almost sombre, and, you know, they're flying away, they've just lost one of their men, and it's not such a colourful picture really. So trying to weave this all together was very important for me, yeah. It was an absolute joy to do this commission, because it was not only a fascinating story, but also it was very humbling to think, well, this is just one story. There were so many stories, and just to give recognition to this one person is very meaningful. And that kind of really gave me goosebumps and made me feel quite connected with him, especially because the descriptions of this attack were so vivid. They flew over in order to attack 12 enemy boats which were docked in St. Peter Port. It was extremely rough, and they flew over at wave top height through a very narrow corridor. It was 312 Squadron, but also 313 Squadron, which was another Czechoslovakian squadron. And they did manage to attack these boats, and they thought that they had been more successful than they actually were. I think they managed to attack 4, but they didn't sink any. But the flank coming from the island was just immense, and that evening was described as absolute hell. And quite early on, I think, Jaroslav was hit in the tail, and he tried to gain enough height to parachute, but he couldn't because he couldn't gain any more height than I think 100 feet. I do hope that on the one hand people may look at the painting and see a really interesting story behind it of Novak, who was actually, his friends called him Yardeskie. I think that must have been his nickname, so that they can understand an insight into one life, but also that amazing selflessness of him being from the Czech Republic and volunteering his services to the RAF, and then, you know, coming to Guernsey and attacking enemy boats here. What really struck me, I think, is this transcript and how incredibly, in a way, kind of not blasé, but they just say, well, you know, goodbye and good luck, and he says, you know, goodbye, boys, just like, how, at this the end of your life, this is just such a kind of civilized way to to say goodbye to your friends. I mean, that really, really struck me, and I guess that bravery, that I guess this is what the mentality was for these pilots. You know, it's like, okay, this is my time now. You know, goodbye, boys, and good luck. And that really, really struck me when I read his story the first time. So I think that is probably one of the most powerful things about his story, that I've certainly taken away, and that I would want people to also kind of feel the power of those words, his final words. Yeah.